Aloha and welcome to the 9th Annual Hawaii Energy Conference presented by Maui Economic Development Board with support from the Maui County Office of Economic Development. Please welcome Conference Chairs Jacqui Hoover and Frank Rego and Program Committee Member Doug McLeod as they kick off Day 2.
Aloha mai kako. We have a great program planned for everyone today. But before we begin our Day 2 program, Jacqui Hoover, Doug McLeod, and I will take a few minutes to reflect a bit more on Day 1. Jacqui and Doug, we've spent the first day trying to define the what of electrification. And it's interesting to note there was no mention of rail at all. That being said, we have received informal and formal feedback from others. I would draw your attention to a Maui News headline on May 11th, which basically said, amid the clean energy push, experts worry some will be left behind. On Tuesday, we did a short reflection on Day 1, and I focused my remarks on the mana'o gifted to us by Cynthia Resentes of Waianae in the Community and Electrification panel, which to me demonstrated a disconnect in the perception of the value and impact of electrification in different communities. My question was, how do we make individuals like Cynthia and her ohana beneficiaries of the energy transition and not victims of it, either short-term or long-term? So Jacqui and Doug, I would appreciate your thoughts on Day 1. Why don't we start with Jacqui and then move on to Doug?
Great. Good morning, everyone. So certainly what we learned or had reiterated for us is that equity and socioeconomics have become such an integral part of the narrative when we're speaking about energy and electrification. And it's become integral to the extent that the U.S. Department of Energy has its Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, which in turn has trademarked the title of Equity and Energy. So I think we'll continue to hear more about this. And I want to turn it over to Doug, who I had the privilege of having a short discussion with, and he's got some great mana'o to share with us on this.
I don't know, we'll see if it's great mana'o, but I do think that because EVs have been so high profile, so in the news, there's a tendency to really talk about these vehicles. And we got to start by recognizing that purchasing a new car today is a major expense that a lot of people just aren't capable of. And the average car costs $45,000 today. That's not an EV figure, that's across the board. So, you know, we have to recognize that if we try and make these discussions about, you know, going out and purchase, which new car are you going to purchase? That's not necessarily the relevant discussion for a lot of folks. And we need to recognize that. I think the other piece maybe that we should talk about for just a moment too is urban versus rural. And, you know, some of the solutions that we're working on the hardest really are not necessarily suited for, you know, rural infrastructure today. And in particular, you know, high-speed chargers, things like that. I mean, you know, where they're going to be and who's going to pay for them. You know, there really isn't a system that, or there just isn't anything in place where the average person in Waianae can see a day-to-day benefit. And, you know, maybe one final thought before I turn it back over to you all is just that there are a lot of benefits from electrification that are not directly financial. So, you know, whether you're the person that no longer annoys your neighbors with a gas-powered leaf blower, or you switched, you know, your buses in your fleet and made them quieter, there are all these small, hard to quantify benefits to society. And I think, you know, one of Abigail Anthony's points was we need to find a way that those who are benefiting from this are the ones paying for it. So those are a few thoughts. Back to you all.
Okay. So let's turn our attention now to another subject mentioned on Tuesday, Senate Bill 2510. Lots of people talked about the climate benefit of electrification on Day 1. And the primary assumption is that electrification gets us to a low, no carbon grid. Senate Bill 2510 is sitting on Governor Ige's desk for review and signature. Now some are concerned that this bill is a gerrymander of energy, as the legislature is trying to impose a planning requirement that, if implemented, will not allow a zero carbon grid. It could be characterized as not a direct repeal of previous legislation, but on this issue, a sort of a sideswipe. So Doug and Jacqui, let's start again with you. What are your reactions to this?
So one of the first things that I see with Senate Bill 2510 is the reiteration of the importance of defining words and terms that are used so that we are all speaking the same language and ensuring clarification to exclude some of the disconnects that can occur between policymakers' expectations and actual implementation and outcomes. So we start there, and when you look at 2510, you realize that there is such a lack of clarification that it creates more problem than solution. And rather than go on a tangent there, Doug, what are your thoughts on it?
I'm hearing similar concerns from people mainly in the solar industry. And so, and just to be clear for the audience, I mean, what this bill purports to do is to define firm renewable power and say that in the energy planning for the state, you have to set aside, let's just call it a third to simplify here, of that power for what they're defining as this firm renewable power. And, you know, if you do look at the definition, you're going to realize this basically is defined as, you know, kind of an old-fashioned steam boiler setup that would be operated on, you know, wood or some kind of liquid fuel. And that's what best fits the definition. You know, people assume that batteries are going to qualify, but it's a mess that way.
So, Doug, are we really saying that they should be talking about dispatchable power versus terming it as firm power?
You know, it's a great one. I think dispatchable, we kind of understood what that meant. Firm to me is not an engineering word. To me, it is a feel-good word. Like, and I understand the problem they're trying to solve. They're saying that the output from renewables is generally variable, and that's accurate. But the opposite of variable is not firm. The opposite of variable is fixed. And, you know, firm is the opposite of soft. These are not, you know, engineering words. So I am concerned about that. I also think there's a legal issue here. You know, the way this is set up, it basically says once this bill is passed, if God forbid, you know, the governor does sign it, then for 3 years, the legislature has the ability to essentially amend this further without going back to the governor. And to me, that's, you know, just a constitutional problem. You can't amend laws without sending them back to the governor for review. And that's what this purports to do with concurrent resolutions. So above and beyond the concerns of the solar industry that this is kind of potentially cutting them out, you know, there's this kind of legal issue too. And you know, people higher up the food chain than us will make this decision ultimately.
Okay, well, I want to thank the both of you for sharing your mana'o on day one. We're have a lot to discuss, I think, going forward when we have our 10th anniversary of the Hawaii Energy Conference. And I'm sure this is still going, both of these issues are still going to be a topic of concern, both about the community and as well this bill, if it does get signed. Because it's going to be quite an interesting thing to see what the results or the impact of this bill is if it does get signed by the governor. Just one note before I introduce our keynote speaker for today. I want to remind everyone, as you did on Tuesday, if you want to ask a question, please use the question tab to the right of the screen. It is now my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker today, Amy Meyers Jaffe, research professor and managing director of the Climate Policy Lab, the Fletcher School at Tufts University, a komo mai Welcome, Professor Jaffe, and mahalo for being with us today. I know you're no stranger to Maui. And
One of my favorite places in the world, been there multiple times.
yes, exactly. So go ahead. We're ready to listen to your mana'o.
Okay, so we're going to put my slides up for the group. So I am going to, next slide, I'm going to address two major questions today. The first question, why electrification? And I gather from your summary of your first day deliberations that there was a lot of discussion about climate change and decarbonization goals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other reasons why electrification is gaining momentum in both stateside on the mainland, but also probably in Hawaii. And I'm going to emphasize one of them with the most strident of terms. We are about to face a major shortfall of diesel fuel throughout the global commodity market. Here on the East Coast, where I'm speaking to you from, diesel fuel prices are already up 100% from last year. And Europe and the G7 nations have not yet imposed their ban on Russia, which includes a large amount, a million barrels a day plus, of diesel fuel that was supplied to Europe. And it's not that there isn't extra refining capacity to make more diesel, but the price impact's been quite large. We've had weird things. We had a very cold spring on the mainland. You can have other things that propel diesel upwards, like e-commerce for trucking, container ships. And let me not forget to mention that diesel fuel is the fuel that most military equipment runs on. So I think we're going to see a lot of volatility in diesel prices, and that is going to be very uncomfortable on the island of Hawaii. We have had repeated events. I guess I'm a little older than probably some of you in the audience. We've had repeated events where the price of oil gone very high based on cycles or wars or economic booms. And then countries that are petro economies get a lot of money, and then they spend that money on weapons, and then they use those weapons to attack either their own population or a neighboring country. We've seen this pattern over and over again. And then the price of oil goes way up. And with Hawaiians being very vulnerable to this volatility in the price of diesel fuel, it does seem that energy security is going hand in hand with decarbonization in thinking about what is the impetus for electrification and what opportunities are there now that mean that back in the day, diesel fuel was the only choice. You had to import it, you had to pay what you had to pay. But the question is, what are these new technologies that might make it easier to use something other than diesel fuel? Why would you put it in a bill to lock yourself into diesel fuel, which is probably going to be a much worse commodity over time than electricity? And then the other thing we're seeing, which I've written a book about, so plug my book, is that we're seeing more and more technologies where equipment, vehicles, production facilities, farming, your home, your television set, everything is digital today. Everything is connected to your smartphone. It's all automated. It's based on data. And therefore everything runs on electricity. So, go do banking if there's no electricity, because guess what? Everything's electrified. Go buy food at the grocery store without your credit card, which you can't do if there's no electricity. You can't use your credit card. So I think we're finding that with the digital economy, more and more things have to plug in. more and more equipment's talking to other equipment through automation. And there's a great opportunity in that because we can do the same activities using a lot less fuel because we can gain, great efficiency savings and productivity through these different software and data solutions. But the answer is it means that everything basically has a plug. And we have to recognize that. And so that is, I think, one of the big things that drives electrification, even if it seems like it's really a climate change a narrative, the truth is we're moving in that direction anyway because of the nature of the modern world. So next slide. So I wanted to talk to you about this question about whether electricity is going to become the new oil internationally. So putting Hawaii aside for a minute and putting you in the context of where technology is going, where climate policy is going, where energy security is going. Very respected organizations. This slide happens to come from ARENA, which is the global renewable energy entity, kind of like the International Energy Agency of Renewables. Their projections are that 50% of all energy use by 2050 is going to be through electricity as the carrier. Many other organizations that do energy modeling are saying that 50, 60%, those are the projections. And so that raises the question, which I guess people are dealing with in Hawaii, and I have to commend the panel. I would agree with you that you're thinking about dispatchable backup to complement intermittent renewables. And the question is, what is the best way to do that if you're Hawaii? So, very expensive to put in an LNG receiving terminal, liquefied natural gas, right? Very expensive today to have a diesel generator. Very polluting, I would say, to have either a coal or diesel operation. It's just air quality and quality of life in a beautiful place like Hawaii, really wanting to deal with the air pollutants that come along with diesel and coal. So what are the new technologies that are coming that are going to fill this same role that a diesel generator or plant might be playing today, or a coal plant might be playing today? And there are actually multiple technologies on the horizon that are being utilized in different places. And in our question and answer period, people are interested in, particular technologies. I can talk about it, but the one that's been tried in Australia to some success, eliminating blackouts there in the western part of the country, is this virtual power plant where instead of having some utility scale renewable outlet, with a giant battery complex, you give everybody in the community or business community or location a small battery in their private home or business. And then all of those batteries are sized correctly. So if you use a certain amount of electricity in your daily use, we make your battery 30% larger than that. And then if we have a heat wave or some kind of event where we need extra electricity, or we're just going to supplement a day when it's not windy, we take that 30% from everybody's small battery. And it's as if we have a giant power station. When you put enough small batteries in, it's a very efficient way. And it's a software solution, automated, that doesn't bother or interrupt the homeowner. And could be powered by rooftop solar, or could be powered in other ways. So, and the second thing that is sort of new and very in vogue, not yet deployed, but coming in the next year or two, is a metal exchange battery, which are very large, clunky battery systems. But those battery systems have the capability to store electricity for days or weeks, and therefore they're extremely well suited to replace coal as dispatchable power. And they can be stacked and modularized in different sizes. And so, very, very practical solution for a market like Hawaii. Next slide. So, you're all hearing, batteries are expensive. We don't have enough cobalt, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is, and I think this is the important thing, because when you're debating what you're going to do about dispatchable power, what you're really saying is, I'm worried about outages. And so if you see this nice trajectory from 2016 until last year, this is the increase in the amounts of megawatt hours, say, that's gone to battery storage on the mainland in Puerto Rico. And I want you to notice that the segment growth is mainly in places that have had electricity crises. California with the fires, Puerto Rico with the hurricane, Texas with the freeze off of natural gas, Florida with the hurricanes. So you can see that more and more locations are turning to battery storage. And indeed in Texas, Elon Musk has moved his company there. And everybody's talking about, natural gas, you hear like a Ted Cruz stand up and say about how important natural gas is in Texas as a solution, as dispatchable power. But the truth is, behind the scenes, the state has fast-tracked all the regulations that would facilitate putting in batteries. So that is really basically the bottom line on that as a solution. Last slide. So here's an interesting thing. So a lot of times when I talk to people and they say, well, what about hydrogen? Hydrogen a little more challenging handling, but of course, unbelievably seasonal ability, because it can be a liquid fuel. You can put it in a storage tank and hold it for a winter or hold it for an outage problem, a heat wave, whatever. And people say, well, but hydrogen is made from natural gas and that's dirty, and it's not a climate solution and it's expensive and so on. And so this is a forecast by Bloomberg New Energy Finance, where they're showing that building electrolyzers and pairing it with wind is going to be cheaper in the next 10 years than doing hydrogen from natural gas as we do it today, or from coal with CCS. So again, you're seeing in Europe and even on the East Coast, some planners are thinking about how to integrate electrolyzers with wind power to have the backup dispatchable power be hydrogen. I'm ready for questions.
Okay. Mahalo, Professor Jaffe, for your remarks. Again, please use the question tabs to the right of the screen to ask Professor Jaffe about what she has presented this morning. Doug McLeod has joined me for the Q&A. We will start with questions from our participants once they start coming in. But Doug, feel free, as the spirit moves you, to join in, amplify, or dig a little deeper. So I'll start off with a question. I notice in your list of renewable sources, if you want to put it that way, that there was no mention of biomass or biodiesel or those kinds of options that still require some sort of burning to occur. What do you think about those options?
So, no, I mean, I had waste to energy.
Oh, waste to energy, okay.
Right, and that's purposeful because I'm thinking about Hawaii, right? So Hawaii, you have an agricultural base, but you have limited land. So it certainly wouldn't make sense to take agricultural land in Hawaii and grow plantings to burn in your car or to use for electricity. That would not make sense. But what would make sense is to take agricultural waste or even municipal waste, which they are starting to do in California, but definitely agricultural waste, which California has developed a lot of technologies in the last 5-6 years, right? And think about how you would integrate those kind of fuels into your current system. So one of the big things that people look at for biofuels is what we call like a drop-in nature, right? So a little easier on the mainland. If I already have natural gas pipelines, I can turn landfill or agricultural waste into renewable natural gas. So natural gas and methane that's produced from waste. And then I can use that. I can literally just stick it, I have to clean it up, so it's a little expensive, but I can literally just put that into the existing natural gas pipeline system. California is actually putting it in trucks, in addition to generating electricity with it. So, but you know, there's also drop-in biofuels. You're mentioning biodiesel, no question. I mean, and the question is, what would you make the biodiesel from, right? Are you going to collect waste oil from restaurants and hotels? Are you going to, you know, what's the source? But I mean, again, it's something that is definitely being done much more prominently in Europe, and of course, going to become more important now that there's no Russian diesel. You know, biodiesel could be an important source, but you have this, you know, food security issue. Globally, not just in island countries and island states. You know, there's this question about as we have climate change and different weather, how much arable land will I have and what would be the most appropriate use for it?
Okay, thank you, Professor Jaffe. Let's see. So this is a question. How do public-private partnerships affect the rapidity in which new programs can be rolled out? And does this bring governmental leaders to the table quicker on these long-term issues? And there's a second to this. How do these programs get sold to the taxpayers in a relatively easy way? So basically it's about public-private partnerships in terms of achieving our climate goals.
Okay, so Hawaii has actually been very blessed in that regard. Maybe people are not focused on that, but when you have something, I mean, Hawaii's collaborated with the DOE, but again, you have the loan guarantee program and other kinds of support for energy demonstration. We're using public money to prove out a technology. And that has proven very effective, not only in the United States, but around the world. I mean, that's something that we've studied at Climate Policy Lab at Tufts. And there's good evidence that the public money spent prove those technologies out. And really the best structure for that is a public-private partnership. Mission Innovation, which is a organization founded during the Paris Accord that's, I forget, 23 countries, including the United States and China. They're at their annual meeting. They meet once every couple of years. Their meeting last year, the ministerial, they endorsed public-private partnerships as a positive form. And what that would be is, you know, I mean, under the stimulus in 2009 in the United States, for example, it was considered desirable to prove out utility scale, really large utility scale solar projects, some with batteries, some just solar. And so many got built by private investors and private developers like First Solar and Next Era and so forth, but utilizing the advantage of public money, which takes the risk out of it for the investors, that now we don't think anything about we don't think of utility scale solar as being a risky investment, right? So that's a concrete example. To be bipartisan, I'd like to give an example from the Trump administration. The Trump administration decided that the United States should be leading in small nuclear reactors. So maybe not really effective solution for Hawaii, but the US military is looking at SMRs as a solution for Alaska, for example, and which also has the same problem, very expensive diesel and hard to even get the diesel in places in Alaska because of the transport issues. So the Trump administration funded 3 companies to do proof of concept of new SMR designs. You got some really good progress from those companies. Now Bill Gates has invested in one of those companies and they're building a demonstration project in the United States. NuScale, which was the furthest along on SMR, actually won a contract in South Africa, beating out China and Russia. And so again, another sort of success story of a technology that originally somebody like Bill Gates might have thought that as being too risky to invest in, which is now really basically going to become a solution that can be used in multiple locations.
Okay. Thank you for that. In Hawaii, we have a little problem. I think, if I'm correct, correct me if I'm wrong, we have a constitutional prohibition of the use of nuclear energy in the state, but that's kind of a interesting question. Here's a good question. Would you include renewable propane in the waste to energy category?
You know, I want to commend the questioner. I didn't even know you could make renewable propane. I mean, you can make renewable methane. So I guess, you know, I mean, I worked on the market for renewable, I mean, we call it renewable natural gas, but it's basically methane for the state of California, and looked at what the costs were going to be for different sources. And, you know, it's a viable fuel. In California, it required a pretty big subsidy initially, but California has the benefit of the carbon price, and that has made a lot of the renewable fuel ventures very profitable. And what you've seen in the last 2 years, I don't know if people know what a SPAC is, you know, the special purpose vehicles. Now, people don't want to do an IPO because that's expensive and time consuming, so they do these SPACs. A lot of the SPACs have moved into renewable fuels. And just to give you an example, I mentioned Bill Gates doing small nuclear reactors. There's another family, billionaire family in Texas, the Rice brothers, they're called, right? I'm blanking on people's first name. Anyway, they bought this natural gas company, EQT, which is the largest natural gas producer in the United States, a lot of acreage in Pennsylvania. And the Rice brothers, the 3 of them, invested in SPACs to do renewable methane. They think it's going to be a profitable business and a promising business from an environmental standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Doug, you may want to get in a last question. We got about a minute and a half.
One question for you, Professor Jaffe. Just looking at your slides on electrolysis and the potential there, I guess if we've gone to the trouble of making electricity with a renewable source, you know, solar or whatever it's going to be, wind, why further convert that? I mean, if every additional conversion of the form of energy is going to be, you know, adding some inefficiencies, why don't we just stick with it in the form of electricity, put it in a battery? Why further convert it to hydrogen?
So that gets to the dispatchable power question, because maybe at noon, when solar is at its most radiant, there's not enough demand to absorb all the solar that's available, and you could electrolyze it into hydrogen and use it later, right? So some of that has to do with the nature of the market, you know, how saturated with renewables is a particular market. If you're if you're someplace in your 20% renewables, it probably doesn't make any sense. But as we get closer to, you know, 70, 80, 90% renewables, then because we have these time of day mismatches between when I have the most demand and when I have the most renewable energy, you could solve that with an electrolyzer. But, there are other ways to solve it. Like I mentioned, digital, Google has the Nest. They came out with the Nest Renew. It's literally a thermostat that would change what electricity use you have in your home based on when there's an excess of solar energy, and therefore you should buy it because it costs 0 instead of 7 cents or 12 cents per kilowatt hour. And indeed, what we're seeing in the market, which is very peculiar right now, is places that have this mismatch where they have a lot of solar at noon and they don't have enough offtake, where they have a lot of wind in the evening and they don't have enough offtake. You're seeing cryptocurrency centers put themselves in those locations and then buy the curtailed renewables in those locations to basically get free electricity.
Well, thank you, Professor Jaffe. Mahalo for being with us today. We'd like to thank all those who submitted questions and those listening attentively. We really enjoyed your time together. We will welcome you back once
I'm looking forward to coming to Maui for the in-person conference.
So we'd actually would welcome you back.